say during the 70s and into the early 80s, the economy was quite buoyant. If we recall, oil production was at very high levels. There were still spillover effects from the Middle East war that caused oil prices to go very high, and the influence of OPEC in raising prices. So there was a lot of money floating around, and people were looking for investment opportunities. It was in that context that the timing of the stock exchange being established under the Securities Industry Act was very timely, and it provided the opportunity for an outlet for some of these funds that people were earning. At the same time, the overall financial landscape was being developed. So you had merchant banks being established, companies going public. A lot of things were happening in terms of the development of the capital market and the growing sophistication of the financial industry as well. Prior to the stock exchange in the 1970s, there was approach by the government to encourage companies, particularly in the manufacturing and the banking sector, to localize their operations. As a result, an opportunity arose for citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to acquire shares, and there was an informal arrangement between brokers to trade shares in an informal manner. And that was the recognition then that there was a need for a formal stock exchange to come into existence. The Securities Industry Act of 1981 established the stock exchange, and it was initially supported considerably by the central bank. Most of the members of staff of the stock exchange came on secondment from the central bank. The central banks provided financial support to the exchange. When we look back now, it was a very unusual setup. The initial setup, which would seem very archaic at this time, was floor trading, an open outcry system where brokers sat around a table, called out their orders. The orders were marked up on the board in chalk by a market official, and you had another market official with a calculator who was adjusting orders as shares were being bought and sold. So by today's standards, where we're trading electronically, it would seem very archaic. It's interesting that the stock exchange, when it was first established, began operations on Independence Square in what was then the Union Club building. After the Union Club building was acquired and eventually demolished, the exchange took up temporary residence before actually returning to what was the newest St. Nicholas building and acquiring its own floor. One of the problems with the 1981 Securities Act was that in establishing the stock exchange, it made the stock exchange both the regulator and the marketplace. So you had an inherent conflict in some ways, where the stock exchange was the authorizing body for new issues, IPOs and the like, but also the trading floor where brokers were interacting and trading. So during the 1990s and even into the early years of 2000, a number of developments took place at the exchange, including the cross-border trading with the stock markets of Barbados and Jamaica, the establishment of the Trinidad and Tobago Central Depositories. One of the problems with the initial trading system was that, or rather the settlement system, was that to settle a trade, the seller had to deliver physical certificates to his broker, the transaction had to be certified, the certificates had to go to the registrar to issue new certificates. So it meant that there was a huge time gap, usually 4, 5, 6, even 8 weeks before a purchaser of shares could then trade those shares. With the establishment of the central depository, obviously it became a lot more efficient and a lot easier within a shorter time frame for participants in the market to actually trade their shares. Along with the developments from the 1990s, a big development was the privatization of the stock exchange and the transition from being basically a state institution to being a private company. And from that time, the exchange had to be run as a business venture, making sure that it was able to support itself and generate profits for growth and for the development of new products, which were required to keep the exchange up to date and relevant to participants in the exchange.